Okay, I'm recording.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Frank, for jumping in so readily like that. Welcome everyone to the UEC. We are a group of mainly well, a group of groups mainly in the New England and Mid-Atlantic regions. We meet virtually every third Wednesday of each month to talk about urban forestry and related topics. We have our Google Meets groups forum, which is used to share upcoming events, research, jobs, and topics related to urban forestry. And you can also find our meeting recordings on our YouTube channel, which is just www.youtube.com/at Urban Ecology Collaborative. So before we get started with our presentation this morning, I wanted to open it up for any community announcements. If anybody has anything they'd like to share, now is the time. And I just want to shout out Frank again for this really cool icebreaker. So everyone can think about it. Maybe by the end of the year, we'll ask this question again. Maybe there'll be more research that was done. The question was name a patriotic tree for America's 250th. Okay, hearing no other calls for announcements, we'll just get right into the presentation. Okay, so today we're really excited to welcome Megan Fangmeyer. She's with the Arbor Day Foundation, and she's here with Bradley, who she'll introduce shortly. But just as a way of introduction, today's topic is titled Natural Disasters, From Recovery to Resiliency. Megan Fangmeyer is a product manager at the Arbor Day Foundation, where her current focus is on disaster recovery. She joined the foundation in fall of 2025 and brings more than a decade of experience in product leadership, building data-informed, mission-driven products with measurable real-world impact. Prior to the Arbor Day, Megan spent over 15 years at FACTS Facts Management, an ed tech company where she led products and product teams supporting K to 12 education. Megan, we're really excited to have you join us, so please take it away.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. In the chat, there should be a link that you can click on if you haven't already, but this is a presentation in Miro, and we will be having a lot of interactive sticky notes and surveys throughout the presentation. So you'll want to make sure you get logged on there. Once you click on the link and are on the board, it should give you a join presentation here to click, and that will take you so that the slides are full screen, but I'll of course be sharing them as well. But once we get into the activities, you'll need that. If you do ever navigate away, if you're trying to cheat and look at the next upcoming slides, you will have a return to Megan when you want to head back to the presentation. I've got Bradley is here to assist both as we're doing sticky notes, but also in the chat. So if you're having any issues, certainly chat in the chat with him and he can help troubleshoot for you. All right. As Clark mentioned, my name is Megan Fangmeyer. I'm a product manager here at the Arbor Day Foundation. I'm focusing on disaster recovery. We're doing a lot of research on how we as a foundation can help with some of the near-term efforts that go on before replanting is ready to happen. How can we better support our planting partners? What are the types of activities? How can we get donors excited about helping communities in that immediate aftermath of a disaster? With me is Bradley Sullivan. He's our associate product manager. He's both helping me as we are doing research and doing experiments around this near-term disaster recovery, but he also focuses on data analytics and market research for us here at the foundation. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about natural disasters by the numbers, but my goal is to spend most of the time in conversations so that you guys can learn from everyone. We can learn from you, bring in ideas, talk about challenges, opportunities, but really focusing on what ideas and solutions have you had and done already, or done and maybe it didn't work well, so we can learn from that, and what ideas do you have that we can implement in the future around natural disasters. So we're going to kick it off with a sticky note. So if you've never used Miro, these are sticky stacks, so you can continually bring over different sticky notes. Once you click on the sticky note, if you see something somebody wrote that you really love, you have a little like fire or heart or thumbs up that you can give as well. So I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. The sticky note to answer is, what are one or two things you are hoping that we discuss today? So I'm going to start this. It should play a little bit of music, but give us a chance to get in there. About 5 more seconds. Wonderful. Bradley is going to take some of these ideas into discussion a little bit later in the presentation. We also took your answers from the survey and have those ready for discussion as well. If you didn't have a chance to fill out the survey that went out in the email, you're still welcome to do so. I will follow up with updated on everyone's answers. Again, everything is anonymous from that survey when we send that out. First, I want to talk a little bit about the research I've been doing. So I've been with the foundation now. I just finished up my 5th month, and I have been focusing on researching both with our planning partners and our donors and in general some of the challenges and thoughts around disaster recovery. These are some of the big themes that really caught my attention as I've been learning. The first one is how many critical decisions are made in just the weeks after a storm, and those really can determine how a tree canopy recovers, what trees are saved, what trees are not. And so that's a really critical time to get the voice of those that know trees and can help advise communities, cities in what needs to be done. Disasters, of course, are a hard topic to talk about, but what I love and I've learned from this community is when you go to rebuild, everything's being rebuilt with the lens of resiliency. You guys are getting the voices in there to say these are the trees we should be planting. We should be learning from what's surviving. We should be learning how, and we should be adding more trees. So disaster recovery offers that opportunity for us to accelerate the resilience of our communities. I've seen a challenge where there is an urgency to act after a disaster and a lot of pressure, especially from cities, to rebuild as soon as possible, but that there needs to be thoughtful rebuilding to be able to rebuild from resiliency. So balancing that urgency with doing things right. A big one I can remember from my first week reading some interviews is how much trees symbolize hope for the community. So when we have a disaster, there's all sorts of imagery around trees down, trees on houses that are really hard to see. I hadn't, until I started working on this, thought about the flip side, about once a community sees trees being planted, new trees on the sides of the road, that is a symbol of hope, and it's a symbol that we're here, we're recovering, we're on to repairing and rebuilding after that disaster. And then really big themes around educating communities on trees when it comes to disasters. There can sometimes, I've heard about fears, especially after a disaster, of replanting because of some of the downed trees and effects that happened, but really helping educate the communities on the impact that trees make on stormwater management, on helping prevent embers from fires moving to their houses, about how to plant correctly so that the trees that we are planting in the ground stay. So next question here, and this is a scale. So you'll be able to come in here and put your scale of where you're feeling. And this is a very subjective question here. So how prepared do you feel your community is for the next natural disaster affecting trees in your area? And so this might look like, again, different definition for everyone, that there's a disaster preparedness plan or actions that your organization is ready to take to help recovery. Good volunteer base, trained, ready to assist post-disaster. Communities know who to call for tree assistance, how to work with down damaged trees. Resilience planted, good maintenance on trees. So we can take just a moment and you can put your cursor you or your community is at.
Um, I am not understanding how to do that. I'm sorry.
That's all
Is
right.
that in the presentation in the link?
Yes.
Slide to the right to find the board.
Yep, in the
Okay.
link in the chat, or I have it down here if you head there. And you should get a pop-up when you get on to join the
Oh, there it
presentation.
is.
Wonderful.
No, I see it. Okay, cool. Thank you.
All right, so I think overall we're kind of grouping here in the moderate side. All right, next question. What are some of the biggest challenges or opportunities your community and urban forest have after a natural disaster? I'm going to do a 2-minute timer. Oh, somebody's moving the screens. Here, let me get back in. There we go. I'm going to start a 2-minute timer here, and you can grab the sticky notes and bring them over. About 15 more seconds. So you can finish up if you're mid sticky note here and take a moment to read some of these challenges. Again, Bradley will be adding some to discussion here in just a bit. All right, a little bit about natural disasters here. And I think because this affects us all, we know, but just What we're feeling, the data definitely backs up. This is from the climatecentral.org, and they focus on billion-dollar disasters. So this by no means encompasses all the disasters that happened. For instance, even the floods that happened in Texas that affected Camp Mystic wouldn't be included because that didn't quite reach the billion-dollar disaster, but it's still very major effect on communities in that area, both the trees and the peoples themselves. So we are seeing stats, this is from 1980 to 2025, that we are seeing more extreme natural disasters. So you can see that the number of billion-dollar disasters are increasing. Number of billion-dollar severe storms are increasing. And then we're seeing less time between disasters. So we used to have more time before we saw another billion-dollar disaster. And I think the average now is about 10 days. In the United States. Worldwide, last year, over 87.8 million people worldwide were affected by natural disasters. So a big thing facing all of our communities across the world. This is a multi-select, so you'll be able to come in and you should be able to choose as many as you. Which constraints most limit your replanting readiness after a disaster? Right. Seeing staffing capacities coming out as the big one. Just another moment here. And again, you can choose multiple. Great, thank you. So if we look, the top ones here, we have staffing capacity, lack of funding looks like it's coming in second, and then we've got funding timing, short planning windows, community readiness, and then long-term maintenance commitments as well. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the numbers from the Canopy report. If you haven't heard of the Canopy report, we have the Harris Poll surveys on behalf of the Arbor Day Foundation. This was done in March of 2025, so this is our 2025 Canopy report. But as we look at these numbers, that there's a 95% confidence level with a plus or minus 2.8 percentage points on that. But there's a whole section on disaster recovery. I'm covering just a couple of slides from that, and I'll give links both here in a moment and at the end of the presentation if you want to download the rest of the report. So first, based on the data we saw, of course, 61% of Americans have experienced a natural disaster or event in the past 12 months, excessive heat being the one that most have noticed. 33% in the West was the largest area, so we have both overall and within regions for these. With that, 62% of Americans have noticed a significant change to tree coverage where they live. If you look, 21% are seeing trees that are dying for drought or extreme heat. That's 32% in the West. Hurricane storms affecting 29% of Americans, with the most 28% is being in the South. And then 16% of Americans have been affected by the wildfires destroying trees in the region. Of course, 34% in the West, which is a big swing there. But we know the concentration of the fires going on there. So definitely seen across the nation. I love this phrase that we use here at the foundation, that hope for the planet is bold. As we talk about these stats, it's easy to feel maybe a little pessimistic about the future, but we truly believe that we can make a difference, we can make an impact, and that if we all band together and work on that, that we can do that, and hope for the planet is bold. We know that disasters are causing huge effects on our communities, but we truly believe that trees are a solution to what is going on. Trees not only are helping out with the environment, but they truly heal the people that are affected by these natural disasters. Americans agree with that. 86% of Americans do believe right now it's critical to be replanting our nation's forests. 90% believe that tree replanting in communities that are affected by these disasters is a very important part of recovery. And overwhelming, Americans see trees as a tool to build resilience to storms, heat, and natural disasters. I know a lot talk about the challenges of educating the community, but this is working. We are seeing that the majority of Americans agree, and sometimes it's the tactile that you guys are working with on how to help them act on this underlying belief that we see. If you're interested in all the stats and diving in, have a QR code here that you can head to. I have a link here at the end of the presentation. There is a link that you can click on as well, and we'll make sure we send that out with materials. There's all sorts of information about Americans' views on trees. I love it because Americans do love trees, and it's kind of a nice big boost as you look at those stats. I'm also going to plug real quick here, Unearthing Optimism. It's our new podcast. So Dan Lamb hosts. The very first episode was related to disaster recovery. We had Stephanie Abrams from the Weather Channel as our guest, talking about the science of what. Just launched our second one on Monday. So there are 2 podcasts out there to listen, and there are more to come. We have a lot of really, really exciting guests lined up. All right, we're going to launch fully into discussion with that. I just want to frame that we are bold enough to believe that we can make a difference, that what you guys are doing in your communities is helping everyone out. We want to continue that. We want to help support you. So our answers from the survey: does your organization have documented disaster plans? So as we look and think about this, not a lot do, which is fine. And it's great that we see a lot of communities starting to build this, starting maybe not even a full like disaster plan that's official, but starting to think about how do we act in that immediate aftermath? What can we do? And we'll launch into some discussions on that. We have about 13%, so 1% of 8 answer that they do have a reliable source of funding. So this is something we're looking at the foundation. As I mentioned, how can we help get funds to you to help support the disaster recovery work? The Disaster Recovery Act most affected by funding gaps. We've got debris cleanup and disposal. The top, I think, was volunteer, crew, and coordination, and community engagement and education. And then what are the biggest funding barriers during disaster response and early recovery? So we've got other that had a lot of things listed that I can send out after, but administrative burden is a really big one that was listed here as well. All right. Now we're going to launch into planning for a disaster. So this, I do have stickies that you can put things on, but I'm going to say go ahead and come off mute if you have thoughts. This is just launching into an open discussion. So stickies, if you're wanting to like stick it, somebody else is talking, you want to stick your thought on there. Bradley's also going to be kind of recording what we're talking about and putting those as sticking. But let's talk about what kind of strategic planning efforts should we be doing to prepare for disaster. So if you have a disaster plan and you've worked with that, go ahead and unmute, talk about what you're either thinking about or what you've done to prepare for disasters.
I know in Pennsylvania we have something called it's called Coordinate. It's something that's actually online that's managed by utility companies when they're going to do removal, like do different projects. And I'm thinking that that particular format, which is bringing all the people who would be responding to a disaster at the same table to see who would go in, like to have a triage of who goes in first and what's most important after a disaster is important. I know we had a huge storm in Pittsburgh last year, and a lot of trees came down with the storm. And so it was interesting to see the communication between the utility companies and some of the municipalities that needed, trees removed. And so this platform would be a way to support that communication. But to me, I think that would be a key factor of any kind of response is knowing who goes in first in terms of is a priority just to remove the limbs from whether it be destructive to folks, and then you're cleaning that up and then coming back to replace fallen trees after some time. So having a centralized understanding of who responds when.
That's great. Who responds when? Oh, looks like we have the slide moving around there. I know I've seen as I've been doing my research, there is, I think the USDA Forest Service has a fillable PDF around disaster recovery. and can, do some of those things that you're talking about, Clara. So certainly if anybody has any resources, I think that'd be a great idea to be able to share out with this group. We have, and New York City has a tree task force internally that coordinates tree response, uses a mix of utilities and parks in that. Does anybody have any more context for that task force, how that organized, how you've worked with that?
I can just briefly talk about it. I used to work at the Office of Emergency Management in New York City, and we coordinated the task force. So basically, when a tree comes down, there's kind of a question of who should take care of it and where it is, and if it hits a utility line, is it safe to work on? So they have a task force of people from those agencies that are relevant that kind of make decisions about that and work through the requests. So that's that. I just wanted to mention that I thought it was something that worked in New York City.
I think that's awesome. I've heard of strike teams that are able to come into areas as well after a disaster recovery to help with rapid tree assessment. I've seen that as a growing conversation. And then offering trainings as well. I'm not sure if anybody's worked with any strike teams or other task forces. What else we have out here? Clear instructions for residents of what to do and who to contact.
Erica has raised her hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Erica. Oh, sorry, I thought we had these locked so that you couldn't move them. Erica,
I have a question about the task force at New York City. So here in Philadelphia, I work for the city. We do have like an emergency operating center that opens, but we find that sometimes the events that cause the most tree damage do not trigger the emergency operating center. So for example, on June 19th, we had a 20-minute windstorm that resulted in over 500 individual tree emergencies across the city. But there was no EOC activation. So I'm wondering in New York City, how does that task force coordinate? Is it through the city's emergency operating center, or is it like as a separate operational unit?
My understanding is it's through the EOC of the city, but it could be stood up for a smaller event if needed. I'm not sure what the threshold is or anything like that, but I know it's coordinated by emergency management. So if the EOC is open, then it's usually activated, but I think it's activated often independently as well.
Okay, thank you.
This is a good one. FEMA reimbursement process. Does anybody have like plans ready to go and understand what are the requirements that FEMA has to get reimbursement? I've heard that can be a challenge sometimes of knowing in advance as you're trying to take action really quickly for that. Has anybody had experience working with that?
Yeah, we haven't dealt with that yet. But Erica, please go ahead. You had unmuted. I was saying that we haven't yet dealt with that here for the FEMA yet. Yeah.
We do have in our inventory system, in our work order system, when jobs are completed, we put in what the staffing hours, it's called I think it's called ELM, equipment, labor, and I'm not sure, I can't remember what M stands for. But essentially what each job cost, and that's how we track it. And for FEMA events that can be reimbursed by FEMA, we can then pull all of that by date. to get reimbursed.
During an exploratory interview with a group in Shreveport, Louisiana, I don't have first-hand experience, but they were telling us that some groups unintentionally exclude themselves from FEMA funding by not properly documenting disasters when they happen. So I know that there's an element of documentation and photographing the damage and being sure that that's built into your disaster plan, so that you don't, again, unintentionally disqualify yourself from that.
Got a couple on more proactive tree risk assessments and prevention, the regular tree hazard assessment, large planting spaces, strong maintenance standards. Does anybody have some examples of what they're doing or what they're thinking about as an organization to help communities with that or with your cities? I know here in Lincoln, especially along utility lines, LES, we're very lucky, it tends to be very proactive in working with our trees for those disasters. Awesome. We can move on to the next topic. I always encourage as we have these, as you're thinking through, always think about, what is a step that you can take after this meeting? What are ways you guys as a community here can collaborate on some of these? So I'm seeing a lot on, on education on the plans, and I think we certainly can think through as an organization here at the Arbor Day Foundation, what can we do to help expedite that so that you guys aren't starting from scratch on some of these plans? So that's part of what we're working to learn. So next question that came up from the survey is, what unique challenges do different types of storms bring, and how are you adapting to those challenges? So some of the stats that I've seen is not only are we having more storms, but the different areas affected. So for instance, tornadoes, where Tornado Alley used to be, we're actually seeing more tornadoes that are on the outsides of that. We're seeing more areas are affected by fires. Even hurricanes sometimes are extending the areas that they're affecting. So what unique challenges are you guys seeing? But also, how are you adapting and helping prepare your community as those disasters are happening? And again, feel free to unmute as well. This can be an open discussion in addition to those sticky notes. Summer storms and everyone's on vacation. I had not thought about that, but yep. I know we've listed staffing as one of the big challenges that has come up. We have a lot of small but mighty teams.
I feel like my responses are extremely city operations focused. It would be helpful to know how many other people here on the call are working for a city in operations. I see Steve. I know you are.
That's Steve. You guys can give like a thumbs up if you're part of the city or speak up. I know those challenges are different and unique between nonprofits and cities. Debris management has come up quite often in interviews. I've had certain areas have had challenges where a lot more mills are closing, or there's just a sheer amount of debris that goes on afterwards that it's overwhelming the systems. And I think this comes up as a question later, but we can discuss it now. I'm curious, has anybody had experience of unique ways or different ways to help communities manage that debris, maybe reuse that debris in different ways, or plans to work with that?
We have there's a group in Pittsburgh called Land Force that has been trying to do some wood reuse work. So coming and taking some of the wood that's taken down from trees, but I think it may be a little challenging with a storm if the wood is really damaged as it's coming down. But they've been doing some of that recovery work in some areas where we've been actually taking down trees. They have a mill that was installed also as part of the Inflation Reduction Act funding, where they're able to do some of that wood reuse in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area. So, yeah. They do workforce development as well. So they really are bringing a big, uh, big support to the region by being able to do that.
Well, has anybody else had organizations like that popping up in your area, or ways that you guys have been able to manage the debris afterwards effectively?
I'll just give an example from, I know our partners in Miami have, deal with hurricanes. This is more not a solution, more of a note that often it's kind of like hazardous waste because it's mixed with other things. It can be trees mixed with other things. And often it's uh, staged in a natural area, or they see a natural area as a place to dump, and that it can remain there for years. So I know that's an issue that people have had in the past, and um, what to do with all that wood debris and where to keep it is can imperil other tree canopy. But it's a kind of a big problem for some cities.
It's definitely been a really big theme. Also, they called out that if we can't get that debris up, we then have fire risk later as that dries up. That's something we've been looking at and researching as well, as how is that debris management going? What ways could we help support some of that? Because I've also heard that there are trees that would be able to be used, but because the mills are overrun, or because people are knowing what to do with that it sits out there for longer and then becomes unusable.
I keep thinking about like air quality with fires. I don't know how. I mean, that's a challenge because everyone gets affected by it, but that I'm not able to type in the board, but if I could, then that's one thing I would put in there, something about just like the air quality, managing that when you have a lot of fires was a big deal for us recently.
Oh, Bradley's got that for me. Yeah, and that definitely affects, immediate community so much. Part of, I know, some of the messaging that we've been able to talk to partners that are really excited about replanning and trying to help them understand that, like, now's not the time. We want to wait for the right time after a fire to replant, but really encouraging them to look outside of the area of the burn scar to help replant, to do, everything we can to add more trees that help mitigate that. I've seen a lot of articles coming out around the effects of wildfire, and the quality of the air. I know it obviously affects most of the area within, but even here in Nebraska, there are days where we end up with air quality where they're recommending that we stay indoors when the wind shifts, and that can come all the way down from Canada or from the west, in that area. So it's a huge challenge even outside of immediate areas with wildfire. All right, we can move on to next topic here. So I think we kind of started to talk about this already, but we can certainly add if there's any ideas. Salvaging the wood post-storm. How can we create networks of firewood dealers, mushroom growers, small lumber mills to better manage storm damaged trees? Any additional thoughts there? I know we talked a little bit about that. Clara, you're on mute if you were talking.
I was reading the question out loud. I should
Oh,
probably
okay.
read it in my mind.
Sorry. I called you out.
No worries.
think from this question, one of the things I'm interested in is all the options, and how do we help educate communities? Like, where is that wood going? I think it's a really good call out that removing it and affecting a different area.
I think it's needful. I don't know, this may be very rudimentary, but just even on I don't know if you educate before, after, or during, but
Mhm.
I think there needs to be some kind of seed in people's minds that this is a way that some of their wood they can use their wood post disaster. But I almost feel
Yep.
like doing it during may be a bit insensitive, but maybe
Yep.
campaigns that do some education before and maybe a little ways after could be useful for people in general to know where to bring wood. This almost seems like it would have to be a regional scale to make sure that the demand that would be so great for all those trees has place to go. Just responding to what Sam mentioned about capacity for processing all that wood that would come from a disaster. It seems like it would need to be a regional effort to organize this.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. But yeah, I think planning for, we know generally when disaster seasons are, and of course we're having things happen a little bit outside of those, but can we proactively help the communities understand? At the foundation, we're always continuing looking at how can we help education as well for those. I'll say, this was before I worked at the foundation, but we had one of those straight line winds come through, 90-mile, 100-mile-hour winds, took out so many tree branches. And I just, as a community member, I didn't know what to do with all of it. I was like, I don't know if our trash picks it up, if it doesn't. Luckily, I have an arborist that had helped me with the tree, and he is always on dial anytime any of that happened. So he was able to come help me with some of that. But I know I felt very lost as a community member, having not had something like that happen before that took out so many branches at one time. So especially with this affecting new areas, I know Des Moines had one that took out, I think, 70% of the tree canopy. It's outside of storms that we're used to. We got some links for some options. Urban Wood Network was called out as a great resource. All right. Next question. So this specifically to the nonprofits, how can a nonprofit with tree planting and workforce programs supplement and support disaster recovery effort? How can a small nonprofit of 5 people and no gear be of assistance? Well, let's ask for nonprofit. I know we've got a couple of folks from the city as well. Like, your thoughts on how could nonprofits help partner in those areas? I know some in some of the interviews talked about that a lot of the concentration is on the public areas, but then we have a lot of community members that are dealing with this as well. So feel free to jot down notes or speak up on thoughts. What are different ways that nonprofits could take more of an active role in that immediate recovery efforts, knowing some of the challenges around staffing and abilities?
Feel like something that comes to mind for me is just like I know in Boston during storm events, um, like there's a lot of like feelings and anger, maybe more like community response to like public departments during storm events. Like there's a lot of pressure and sort of maybe sense of like, oh, the city's not doing enough, or look at how slow this response is, or, and I've talked to a lot of arborists in the city and, folks who work in the public departments here. And so I think like it's a place where nonprofits can step up is like, um, how do we like, how are public departments faced with those like attitudes of the public in communities and like when we talk about education in our nonprofit, like how can we continue to kind of, just learn more about how people have been impacted by storms or other natural disasters and trees and like kind of where that blame is placed and like more think about like, okay, those were some negative things that you experienced, but like can we just like, yeah, that education piece around like what does that response look like? And yeah, I think like if there were more programs or efforts to help people deal with those negative effects that like sometimes like public departments can't always focus on. I could see a nonprofit helping fill in those roles or partnering with a municipality or something like that.
Love that. Got an initial boots on the ground recon after the disaster, connecting with local communities, and it's a big theme here is especially nonprofits are working with the individual members in the community. How can you help that education? I know as we look at how can we help support, a lot of this is about activating right after a disaster. So here at the foundation, we're looking at what templates can we have, what can we have ready to go. So could there be an email blast to your members on what to do with the downed trees, who to call, ready to go. So when a disaster happens, that email is just ready to hit send. Resources for individuals, links on websites, and here's to direct them just to help remind them in the aftermath. Response sheets, FAQs after disaster support community. Couple on documenting damage, canvassing, and mobilizing landscape contractors. Great. All right. So long-term stability as part of rebuild. Question is, how do cities and communities ensure long-term sustainability as part of the rebuild? So after a disaster happens, as people are replacing trees, so you would have advice, thoughts on how do you make sure that long-term stability is part of that? How are we rebuilding with resiliency? How are you helping educate those communities?
I don't know if this means thinking about like what materials are used or what kind of trees are planted again after, just knowing what would be appropriate after a disaster, what species to be replanted.
Species, so. Anybody had, I had somebody talking about that they're having to start to consider different species in the area because of how there's been the changes in the weathers and the storms. Is anybody else kind of your tree palette maybe changing or adjusting, so you're needing to re-educate what are the best and top trees to be replanting?
I was also being mostly around climate species that are changing, not necessarily around disaster, but that may be an interesting thing to look at from that perspective for us.
Partnering with streets, transportation, public works, right? How do you help individual community members with this? So I think about like as they go to different stores and availability, and I want to replant the trees, are there ways that you guys are helping educate, or are there ways that you guys are working with local nurseries to help ensure what people are choosing as options are good? Like for instance, big tree I had taken down was a silver maple, and I had no idea until I talked to an arborist about how that rots out from the inside once it has damage. And so it was a very hard time to have that big tree taken down, but the arborist encouraged with the amount of storms we're having and how big it was and the damage that was done, and was able to show me and understand. And so like I now know as a community member, like silver maple, probably not something I'm gonna ever replant again. But I know it's kind of overwhelming when you go to a store and have so many options. All right. We have time for probably one more. Budget and planning. How do you budget for disaster recovery? What do you do? I know some of the funding and budget challenges that we talked about earlier. How do you prioritize that? And then what can communities codify in their ordinances to help prepare for disasters? I know one thing we have learned is that there are obviously challenges with budget. That's part of what we validated as an organization, is it is an area of need for our community, to look at how can we help get funding quickly for that immediate disaster recovery? How can we get donors understanding the importance of that and excited about that? Because they're so used to trees and wanting to plant the trees, which is a great part, but how do we help educate them on the importance of being ready for that? You have to understand what materials will be used in recovery efforts.
I keep thinking, Megan, that it may be helpful to do like a smaller working group, just hearing what Erica mentioned with people from the city and operation side versus the nonprofit. So this may be an opportunity for deeper dives. Because I keep thinking about some of our groups that have been working with like Shade Tree Commissioners, working with ordinances for them. And I can see this being like a topic all on its own to talk about, budgeting for disaster recovery for different contexts. So this may be an opportunity.
I think that's a great idea. It's a lot where we don't have a specific budget for this. All right. We are just about at time here, so I'll leave you with, oh, I think I lost one of my slides. There we go. So thank you guys. I appreciate the time to be here. Appreciate all the ideas, the sticky notes, the responses here. As I mentioned, we're continuing to research how we as the Arbor Day Foundation can help show up for you. We've been, have a long history of doing that, but how can we continue to grow our assistance in this? I have these links, should be clickable for you, but I'll make sure that we send them out as well. If you are interested in our Unearthing Optimism podcast, you can click there. We also have our canopy report that you can download. Has a lot of different stats about a lot of different areas of trees. We do that annually and see the increases that we're seeing in confidence. My contact information is here. Would love to connect. As I mentioned, I do a lot of market research along with Bradley on looking at the different areas that we can continue to innovate as an organization and to grow our impact. So thank you guys. Appreciate the time here.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Bradley. Thank you, everybody who joined. There's been a lot of resources shared and a lot of input, and we hope to see you again as you develop out the infrastructure for responding. And again, if we need any follow-up, we can always do it. Erica, if you think it's helpful to have a more focused on operations piece, would be happy to like kind of go a little bit deeper. We're going to stop the recording now, and please be sure to find us online on YouTube at the Urban Ecology Collaborative, and we'll see you next month. Actually, before we close the whole meeting, I just want to make sure everybody's aware of the two announcements that came up at the top of the meeting agenda. There's a call for proposals for the Partners Conference, and then Sam also put something in the chat. Oh my goodness, Sam, I'm forgetting what you put. Are you able to unmute and just say quickly what you put in the chat? But you're not around anymore. He must have left. Okay. Sam is gone, but we'll make sure we put all of those resources in the follow-up email for everybody. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Bradley.
Everyone.